Baghdad, Iraq, January 17, 1991. The desert night air cut cold against Lieutenant James Miller's face as he dangled from a rappel line 14 stories above the ground. The distant thunder of coalition bombing raids provided cover for his approach to the unmarked building. Through his night vision goggles, the concrete structure glowed an eerie green against the black canvas of night. His AR-15 Special Ops variant hung steady against his chest, modified with a suppressor and custom sighting system not available to regular forces. Miller's earpiece crackled with sudden urgency. Chimera 6, we have movement inside the target building. East Corridor. Proceed with extreme caution. Copy that, Miller whispered, his breath visible in the cold Iraqi air. Approaching entry point now. His gloved hands worked with practiced efficiency, cutting through the reinforced glass of the window. As he slipped inside, his radiation detector began to emit a soft, rhythmic beep. Miller froze, checking the reading twice before keying his mic. Command, this is Chimera 6. I'm getting positive readings for chemical agents. Repeat, positive chemical signature. Requesting immediate, a flash of movement from the corridor. Not Iraqi guards. The figure wore American tactical gear. Before Miller could react, a silenced shot rang out. The impact threw him against the wall, blood blooming across his chest. Sorry, Lieutenant, came a whisper as the CIA operative approached. Some secrets need to stay buried in the desert. Colonel Frank Harrington bolted upright in bed, sweat-soaked sheets tangled around him. His weathered hand instinctively reached for the sidearm he no longer kept by his bedside. The red digits of his military-style alarm clock read 0400. Same time he'd awakened nearly every day for 40 years, though he hadn't needed an alarm for the last 20. 32 years and it still won't let go, he muttered, running calloused fingers through his silver-gray crew cut. His one-bedroom house sat on the outskirts of Riverbend, Tennessee, a modest dwelling filled with the artifacts of a lifetime of service. Medals and citations hung in simple frames, not displayed prominently, but present nonetheless. A faded photograph of SEAL Team 6, Operation Desert Storm, stood on his bedside table. Faces young and determined, unaware of what waited for them in the Iraqi desert. Frank's morning routine never varied. 20 push-ups and sit-ups, a shadow of his former training regimen, but maintained with religious dedication. A Spartan breakfast of black coffee, 2 eggs, and plain toast. Dress in pressed khakis and a button-down shirt. His security badge for Oak Ridge Elementary already clipped to his belt. At 0530, he stepped onto his porch, surveying the neighborhood with the practiced scan of a man who had spent decades identifying threats in hostile territory. The American flag hung perfectly from its pole, illuminated by a small spotlight he had installed himself. Frank slid into his 15-year-old Ford pickup, maintained with mechanical precision. The radio remained off. He preferred silence and his thoughts, though lately the latter provided little comfort. The nightmares were getting worse, more frequent. Lieutenant James Miller's face appearing more clearly each time. He arrived at Oak Ridge Elementary 45 minutes before any teachers were due. Frank preferred these quiet moments, checking the perimeter, ensuring doors were secure, examining the grounds with the thoroughness that had kept him alive through 2 wars. The school building stood quiet in the pale light of dawn, American flag waiting to be raised when the day officially began. As he completed his rounds, Frank noticed movement at the far end of the school property. A small yellow school bus had arrived early, the one that served Pinewood Mobile Home Park. A single child disembarked, a girl no more than 10 years old, her small frame engulfed in what appeared to be a military jacket several sizes too large. Frank watched from a distance, his trained eye noting how the girl kept her head down, walking with the careful steps of someone trying to avoid attention. Something about her posture, defensive yet dignified, stirred a memory he couldn't quite place. Within 30 minutes, luxury SUVs and late-model sedans began arriving, disgorging children in designer clothes and expensive sneakers. The socioeconomic divide of Riverbend played out each morning in this parking lot. The children of bank executives and developers mixing uneasily with those whose parents worked at the diner or the struggling paper mill. Frank observed as a group of 6th graders converged on the girl with the oversized jacket. Their leader, a boy with perfectly styled hair and clothes that cost more than Frank's monthly rent, moved with the practiced confidence of privileged youth. "Hey, trailer trash, still wearing your daddy's hand-me-downs?" Nathan Porter's voice carried across the schoolyard. Son of Mayor Porter, the boy had inherited his father's sense of entitlement without any of the political restraint. The girl, Emma Miller, Frank recalled from the school roster, kept walking, her shoulders hunched, but her pace steady. "I asked you a question." "Welfare case," Nathan persisted, flanked by Olivia Bennett and two other children from River Heights, the town's affluent neighborhood. Frank moved closer, his stride purposeful. He'd watched this dynamic play out too many times, stepping in only when physical intervention became necessary. Children needed to develop resilience, a principle he held from his military days. But there were limits. "My dad says people who pretend their parents were in the military are committing stolen valor," Nathan continued, his voice carrying the rehearsed quality of someone repeating adult conversations without understanding their weight. "He says it's practically illegal." Emma stopped walking, her small hands clenched into fists at her sides. "My father was Lieutenant James Miller, United States Navy SEAL," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "He died serving his country when I was 5. Nathan scoffed. "SEALs? Yeah, right. If your dad was really some kind of hero, you wouldn't live in a trailer park. Your mom wouldn't be serving pancakes to my dad every Sunday." Frank had heard enough. He closed the distance in 4 long strides, his presence immediately commanding attention from the group. The children sensed his approach, turning with expressions that shifted from arrogance to uncertainty. "That's enough," he said, his voice carrying the natural authority of command without raising its volume. "School grounds are for learning, not harassment. Move along." Nathan hesitated, weighing defiance against consequences. Mayor's son or not, something in the security officer's eyes, the flat, evaluating gaze of a man who had seen actual combat, made him reconsider. "Whatever," he muttered, backing away with his entourage. "We were just talking." Frank watched them retreat before turning his attention to Emma. She stood rigid, fighting tears that threatened to spill over, her knuckles white as she gripped the straps of her backpack. "You all right, Miss Miller?" he asked, deliberately using her surname with the military courtesy that acknowledged dignity. She nodded once, a quick up-and-down motion. "Thank you, sir." "That's a Navy jacket," Frank observed, keeping his tone conversational. "It was my dad's," Emma replied, her voice taking on a protective edge. Frank's eyes dropped to the left breast of the jacket, where a faded patch was barely visible beneath years of wear. His breath caught in his throat. The emblem, a 3-headed beast, part lion, part goat, part serpent, was unmistakable, though almost completely worn away. The Chimera Unit, a classified detachment within SEAL Team 6 that officially never existed. Frank's mind raced through mission rosters from Desert Storm. Miller, James Miller, the lieutenant who disappeared during a high-priority intelligence gathering operation. Officially killed in action, body never recovered. Classified circumstances. "Miller," Frank whispered, before catching himself. Emma looked up at him with sudden interest, her defenses momentarily lowered by his recognition of the name. "Did you know my dad?" she asked, hope flaring briefly in her eyes. Frank hesitated, 30 years of operational security battling with the shock of recognition. "I knew a lot of good men in the service," he said carefully. "You should head to class now. The bell's about to ring." Emma studied his face a moment longer before nodding and continuing toward the building. Frank watched her go, the oversized jacket hanging from her small frame like a banner of unfinished business. He pulled out his phone once she was inside, dialing a number he hadn't used in years. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered. "This better be important, Frank." "Bob, I need to see you," Frank said without preamble. "I found Miller's daughter. She's wearing his jacket, with the Chimera patch." A long silence followed, broken only by the sound of heavy breathing. "Jesus Christ, Frank! After all these years!" The voice, belonging to retired General Robert Thunder Harrison, lowered to almost a whisper. "They'll find out. Be careful. Don't trust anyone." The line went dead, leaving Frank standing alone in the schoolyard, the weight of old secrets settling back onto shoulders that had never fully escaped their burden. The Sunrise Diner sat at the intersection of Riverbend's past and present, a chrome and neon establishment that had served mill workers and farmers for decades. now increasingly catering to the town's newer, wealthier residents. Frank sat in a corner booth, positioned to observe both the entrance and the staff area, his coffee growing cold before him. Catherine Miller moved with efficient grace between tables, her sunrise diner uniform slightly faded from countless washings. At 34, her face carried the quiet dignity of someone who had endured significant hardship without surrendering to bitterness. Frank watched her interaction with customers, polite but reserved with the wealthy patrons from River Heights, warmer with the regulars who worked with their hands for a living. His mind flashed back to 91. Lieutenant James Miller, 24 years old, showing photos of his pregnant wife during a rare moment of downtime at their forward operating base. "She's my anchor to the real world," Miller had said, his eyes bright with a future he would never see. Frank finished his coffee and left a $20 bill for a $5 breakfast. As he walked to his truck, he pulled out his phone again and dialed the school administrative office. "This is Harrington," he said. "I need to check a student record for security purposes." "Emma Miller, 5th grade. Yes, I'll hold." Minutes later, he had what he needed. Address, Lot 47, Pinewood Mobile Home Park. Emergency contact, Catherine Miller, mother. Previous school, Jefferson Elementary, Norfolk, Virginia, near Naval Station, Norfolk. They had moved to Riverbend just 6 months earlier. Frank drove past Pinewood Mobile Home Park on his way back to school. The collection of manufactured homes sat in the low ground near Cumberland River, territory that flooded every few years, keeping property values low, and residents predominantly working class. Lot 47 was near the back, a double wide with a small porch and carefully maintained flower boxes despite the approaching winter. He parked across the street, observing the property with professional assessment. The defensive line of sight was poor, too many blind approaches, no security system visible. A single mother and child, financially vulnerable, living in isolation. A movement caught his eye, a sedan with tinted windows and no front license plate, parked 200 yards down the access road. The driver remained inside, a silhouette barely visible through the darkened glass. Frank's instincts, honed through decades of combat operations, fired warning signals through his nervous system. He circled the block, approaching the vehicle from behind. The driver remained focused on the Miller residence, unaware of Frank's approach, until the retired SEAL was at his window. Frank rapped on the glass with his knuckles, positioning himself at the driver's blind spot. The window lowered halfway, revealing a man in his 50s, unremarkable except for the military-style haircut and the slight bulge beneath his jacket that suggested a shoulder holster. "Help you with something?" Frank asked, his tone pleasant, but his eyes cold and evaluating. "Just waiting for someone," the man replied, his accent deliberately neutral, the trained speech of intelligence operatives. "This is school property adjacent," Frank lied smoothly. "I'm security. Need to see some ID." The man hesitated, his hand drifting slightly toward his jacket before reconsidering. "I was just leaving," he said, starting the engine. Frank stepped back, memorizing the partial plate visible on the rear as the sedan pulled away. Before leaving, he approached the vehicle's former position and noticed a small device magnetically attached to the underside of a nearby street sign, a directional microphone aimed at the Miller residence. He left it in place. Removing it would only confirm they were onto something important. Back at Oak Ridge Elementary, Frank accessed the school's personnel computer during his lunch break. Emma Miller's file showed average academic performance, but noted adjustment difficulties and social isolation. Catherine Miller's employment history listed 3 years at Norfolk Naval Base Commissary, followed by waitressing jobs. Medical records indicated therapy for Emma following her father's death, listed simply as military service related. Frank's research was interrupted by Principal Richard Morgan's voice over the PA system. "Attention faculty and students. A reminder that our Veterans Day Assembly will take place this Friday at 10 a.m. We're honored to announce that General Robert Harrison will be our guest speaker this year." Frank froze, his coffee mug halfway to his lips. Harrison coming here now, the same day he discovers Miller's daughter with the chimera patch. This was no coincidence. The pieces were aligning with disturbing precision. After 32 years, the ghosts of Operation Mirage were stirring. Catherine Miller's modest trailer was immaculate inside, every surface clean, every possession carefully maintained. The home of someone who valued what little they had. She sat rigidly on her sofa, studying Frank with wary eyes that had seen too many disappointments to trust easily. You knew James? She asked, her voice controlled but unable to completely hide the emotion beneath. Frank nodded, his large frame uncomfortable on the small furniture. We served together, SEAL Team 6, Operation Desert Storm. And you just happened to notice my daughter's jacket? After all these years? The skepticism in her voice was justified. Frank would have had the same reaction in her position. The chimera patch isn't something you forget, he replied quietly. It wasn't supposed to exist. Neither was the unit. Catherine's posture changed subtly, a minute relaxation that told Frank he had passed some internal verification. James never talked about his missions, said it was safer for us if I didn't know. He was right, Frank confirmed. What happened to him? What they told you? That he died in a training accident? Catherine's laugh held no humor. I stopped believing that when two different officers gave me two different accounts. When they couldn't return his body, when his personal effects came back missing items I know he had with him. Frank nodded slowly. Smart woman. James always said you were the brains of the operation. That earned a small, genuine smile, a brief glimpse of the woman James had fallen in love with before tragedy reshaped her life. Why are you here now, Colonel Harrington? She asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. Frank, I retired as major, he corrected automatically. I'm here because seeing that patch on Emma's jacket, it brings up questions that never had proper answers. And because General Harrison is speaking at the school on Veterans Day, that's not a coincidence. Catherine tensed again. Harrison? The one who commanded James's last mission? Frank's eyes narrowed. What do you know about his last mission? Only what James managed to hide before he left. Insurance, he called it. She stood and moved to a framed photograph of her husband in dress uniform. With practiced movements, she removed the back of the frame, extracting a small USB drive hidden in the matting. He left this with instructions to only access it if something happened to him. I never did. Raising Emma alone was hard enough without diving into whatever got James killed. Frank stared at the small device, understanding instantly its potential significance. Have you received any unusual contact recently? Phone calls? Visitors? Catherine's face told him everything before she spoke. Yesterday, a man called, said he was from Veterans Affairs, checking on benefits. But he knew things about James, things that weren't in any official record. Then he said, she faltered. What did he say, Catherine? He said I should get rid of James's jacket, that letting Emma wear it was disrespectful. Her voice hardened. I told him to go to hell. Frank nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. Good response. Then this morning, my boss at the diner hints my hours might be cut. The school counselor calls suggesting Emma might need specialized attention. All in one date after years of nothing. Catherine's eyes bore into Frank's. What's on that jacket that has people worried after all this time? Not the jacket, Frank said quietly. The mission, Operation Mirage. James was sent to confirm intelligence about Iraqi chemical weapons facilities. What he found instead, he stopped 30 years of ingrained operational security battling with the need for truth. A knock at the door interrupted them. Frank was on his feet instantly, positioning himself between Catherine and the entrance, hand instinctively reaching for a sidearm he no longer carried. Mrs. Miller? A young voice called out. It's Michael from next door. Mom wanted to know if you need a ride to work tonight. Catherine relaxed, moving past Frank to open the door. After a brief exchange with the neighbor boy, she closed the door and turned back to him. I have to get ready for my shift, she said. Emma will be home from school soon. I don't want her involved in whatever this is. Frank stood, understanding the dismissal. I'll keep an eye on things from a distance. If anything unusual happens, anything at all, call me. He handed her a card with his number. Why should I trust you? Catherine asked, not taking the card immediately. Because James saved my life in Kuwait, Frank replied simply. And because whatever got him killed is still worth killing for 32 years later. You and Emma need someone watching your six. Catherine took the card, studying it briefly before slipping it into her pocket. Emma has his stubbornness. She won't stop wearing the jacket, no matter what I say. Good, Frank said, moving toward the door. Sometimes the best defense is to stand your ground. Just keep that USB somewhere safe. It might be our only leverage if things go sideways. As he stepped outside, Frank scanned the surrounding area with practiced efficiency. The sedan was back, parked even further away but unmistakable to his trained eye. Someone was very interested in the Miller family, and after 32 years of silence, that could only mean trouble. The Veterans Day Planning Committee meeting ran late, with Principal Morgan fussing over every detail of General Harrison's visit. Frank sat in the back of the room, contributing little but observing everything. "Colonel Harrington," Morgan called, interrupting Frank's thoughts. "Given your military background, perhaps you could act as liaison for General Harrison's security detail?" Frank nodded once. "Of course." "Excellent. The General's office mentioned he'd like to recognize some of our students from military families during the assembly. Do we have a list of children with active service parents?" "Emma Miller," Frank said before he could stop himself. "Her father was Navy Special Operations. Killed in action." Morgan blinked in surprise. "Miller, the girl from Pinewood? I wasn't aware her father was military." "Bronze Star recipient," Frank added, the lie coming easily for the greater truth it served. "James Miller deserved that medal and more." Morgan made a note. "I'll be sure to include her, though perhaps we should discuss her wardrobe. That oversized jacket hardly seems appropriate for a formal assembly with a distinguished guest." "The jacket belonged to her father," Frank replied, his tone making it clear the subject was not open for discussion. "There's no more appropriate attire for a Veterans Day ceremony." As the meeting dispersed, Frank's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Arlington Cemetery, 0800 tomorrow. Come alone. H." Harrison was taking no chances with electronic communications. Smart. Frank deleted the message immediately. Walking to his truck, he noticed Mayor Porter's black Escalade parked beside the unmarked sedan he'd seen earlier. Two men conversed inside, the driver from this morning and a well-dressed man Frank recognized as Charles Blackwood, former CIA operations officer, now running a private security firm with Pentagon contracts. Frank kept his pace steady, giving no indication he'd noticed them, but his mind was racing. Blackwood's presence confirmed his worst fears. This went beyond a simple cover-up. Operation Mirage had been a CIA military joint venture, with Blackwood running the intelligence side. If he was involved now, the stakes were even higher than Frank had imagined. As he started his truck, Frank made his decision. After 32 years of keeping silent, of honoring his oath even when that oath protected the wrong people, it was time to uncover the truth. He owed it to James Miller, to the daughter who proudly wore her father's jacket, and to the small community that might soon find itself at the center of a decades-old conspiracy. The ghost of Operation Mirage had haunted him long enough. It was time to exorcise it, whatever the cost. Arlington National Cemetery spread before Frank in the pale morning light, endless rows of white headstones stretching across manicured lawns. He had arrived 30 minutes early, a habit from his operational days. Assess the terrain, identify escape routes, spot potential surveillance. Despite 30 years of civilian life, some instincts never faded. The Washington Monument rose in the distance, its stone spire piercing a sky streaked with high clouds. Frank had made the 3-hour drive from Tennessee in darkness, his thoughts as turbulent as the mountain roads he traversed. At precisely 0800, a black SUV with government plates pulled alongside the path. The rear door opened, but no one emerged. An invitation rather than an arrival. Frank approached with measured steps, scanning the surroundings one final time before sliding into the leather back seat. General Robert Thunder Harrison sat opposite him, his 4-star rank absent from his civilian attire, but unmistakable in his bearing. At 70, Harrison's face mapped the history of American military engagements across 4 decades. The weathered terrain of Vietnam, the Gulf, Afghanistan, and Iraq. His eyes, sharp and evaluating, had lost none of their intensity. "You look fit, Frank," Harrison observed as the vehicle began moving, circling the cemetery's winding roads. "Cut the small talk, Bob," Frank replied. "You're bringing a 4-star security detail to a small-town Veterans Day celebration. That's not a coincidence after I call you about Miller's daughter." Harrison nodded, a slight smile acknowledging Frank's directness. "Still no patience for politics. That's why you topped out at Major." "That's why I sleep at night." The general's smile faded. "Do you? Sleep at night? Because I haven't." Not really, not since Mirage. The vehicle slowed as it approached Section 60, where many who fell in the War on Terror rested. Through the tinted windows, Frank could see fresh graves, the cost of America's longest wars measured in marble and grief. You know what Miller found, Frank stated rather than asked. You know why they killed him. Harrison didn't immediately respond. He reached into an interior pocket and removed a small device, activating it with a practiced motion. A soft electronic hum filled the cabin, counter-surveillance equipment. What I'm about to tell you violates at least 6 security classifications, Harrison said, his voice lower. But after 32 years, some truths need to see daylight. The SUV stopped beside a row of headstones. Through the window, Frank could see an empty plot with temporary markers, preparations for a future interment. Operation Mirage wasn't just about locating Iraqi chemical weapons, Harrison continued. It was about confirming which weapons Saddam had received from us during the Iran-Iraq War and destroying evidence of American fingerprints. Us? Frank's jaw tightened. We sold chemical weapons to Iraq? Not weapons themselves, precursors, technology, delivery systems, all through cutouts and third parties, of course. Plausible deniability. Harrison's expression hardened. It was the Cold War logic. The enemy of our enemy was our friend until he wasn't. Frank absorbed this, connecting pieces that had never quite fit. And Miller found proof. Harrison nodded grimly. He discovered documentation at the facility, transfer records, technical specifications with American manufacturer codes. He photographed everything. But someone on the intelligence side was monitoring his communications. They couldn't allow that evidence to surface. Not with the coalition assembled, not with the narrative established. Blackwood, Frank said, the name tasting bitter on his tongue. He gave the kill order. Officially, Lieutenant Miller died in a helicopter crash during a sandstorm. Heroic, tragic, unverifiable. Harrison's voice carried 3 decades of carefully managed guilt. I was informed after the fact, presented with national security justifications, and I accepted them. The admission hung in the air between them. The moral compromise of a career officer who had chosen institutional loyalty over justice for one of his men. Why come clean now, Frank demanded. After 32 years of silence? Harrison gestured toward the cemetery beyond the window. Because I'll be joining these men soon enough. Pancreatic cancer. 4 months, maybe 6. Frank studied the man who had once commanded America's most elite special operations units, still powerful in frame but marked by the invisible hand of mortality. I'm sorry, Bob. Don't be, it's clarified things. Harrison's gaze hardened. Blackwood is preparing a Senate run. His campaign is being funded by the same defense contractors who supplied Iraq before Desert Storm, the same men who ordered Miller's death to protect their interest. And now his daughter shows up wearing his jacket with the Chimera patch, Frank concluded, understanding dawning. They're afraid she has his evidence. Or that someone will start asking questions about what really happened to her father. Harrison leaned forward, his voice urgent. They've monitored the family for years. Catherine Miller's job transfers, their movements, always keeping them isolated, struggling financially, discredited. How deep does this go? All the way to the Pentagon, Frank. Secretary level. Harrison handed him a sealed envelope. These are the names I've confirmed. Men still in positions of power, with everything to lose if the truth comes out. Frank took the envelope without opening it. What's your play here, Bob? Redemption before you meet your maker? Call it what you want, Harrison replied, not flinching from the accusation. I'm using my last Veterans Day appearance to set the record straight, to give James Miller the recognition he deserves 32 years too late. You'll never make it to the podium. They'll stop you. Probably, Harrison agreed with a grim smile. That's why I need you on the inside, Frank. To protect the girl and her mother. To make sure the truth comes out, one way or another. Frank stared through the window at the endless rows of white headstones, men and women who had given everything for their country, trusting their sacrifices served a purpose greater than political expedience or corporate profit. Miller deserved better, Frank said finally. From his country, from you. Yes, Harrison replied simply. He did. As the SUV circled back toward the cemetery entrance, Frank felt the weight of Harrison's revelations settling onto shoulders already burdened by decades of unspoken truths. The mission ahead was clear, if daunting. Protect Emma and Catherine Miller while exposing a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. He had faced worse odds in combat, but never with so much at stake. Mayor Edward Porter's office occupied the entire top floor of Riverbend's historic town hall, its windows overlooking the Cumberland River that gave the town its name. The space projected the carefully cultivated image of small-town success, local hardwood desk, historic photographs of Riverbend's founding, military service plaques from Porter's brief National Guard tenure. Porter himself stood with his back to the door, gazing out at the river as Charles Blackwood examined the room's furnishings with the practiced eye of a man accustomed to assessing security vulnerabilities. "I don't like this, Charles," Porter said without turning. "Harassing a widow and her daughter. It feels wrong, even for politics." Blackwood straightened a framed photograph of Porter with the governor, his movements precise and economical. At 58, he maintained the physical discipline of his CIA field operative days, his tailored suit concealing both his athletic build and the shoulder holster he still carried out of habit. "This isn't politics, Ed. It's national security." Blackwood's voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to obedience. "If what Miller discovered in '91 comes to light now, careers end. People go to prison, including some of your most generous campaign donors." Porter turned and his face flushed. "You assured me those connections were legitimate business interests. Defense contracts, infrastructure. They are legitimate," Blackwood interrupted. "Now, after 30 years of careful relationship management and strategic investments." He smiled without warmth. "Your new community center doesn't build itself, Ed." The mayor's shoulders slumped slightly. Like many men in positions of power, he had accepted compromise in small increments until the line between right and wrong blurred beyond recognition. "What exactly do you want me to do?" Porter asked, already knowing the answer would push that line further still. "Nothing dramatic," Blackwood assured him. "Simply apply administrative pressure, school transfer issues for the girl, building code inspections at the trailer park. Make life uncomfortable enough that they leave Riverbend before Veterans Day." "And if they don't?" Blackwood's expression remained neutral, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Then we move to more direct measures." "I won't be part of anything illegal," Porter insisted, drawing himself up. "I've got Nathan to think about, my position in the community." "Of course not," Blackwood agreed smoothly. "You'll be completely insulated, just as you were from the zoning changes that quadrupled your property values last year." The reminder of past favors hung in the air, a subtle threat wrapped in conversational pleasantry. Porter knew the pattern. Each compromise led to another. Each favor demanded reciprocation, the web of obligation growing until escape became impossible. "There's another complication," Porter said, changing tack. "Harrington, the school security officer. He's former military, special operations. He's been asking questions, watching the Miller place." Blackwood's expression sharpened. "Frank Harrington? From Team 6? You know him?" "I know of him." Blackwood's tone suggested the knowledge was not favorable. "He was on Miller's unit, though not on the Mirage operation. Hard-headed, moralistic, the type who believes in absolutes." "Should I have him removed from the school?" "No," Blackwood decided after a moment's consideration. "That would draw attention. For now, we watch him. My people will handle any necessary intervention." Porter nodded, relieved to be absolved of direct responsibility, while simultaneously troubled by the implicit threat. "The Veterans Day Assembly is in 3 days. Harrison arrives tomorrow." "I'm aware of the timeline." Blackwood moved toward the door, conversation clearly concluded. "Remember your part, Ed. Administrative pressure only. My team handles the rest." As the door closed behind Blackwood, Porter returned to the window, gazing out at the river that had once carried the commerce that built Riverbend. Like the town itself, his career had been constructed on compromises, each one logical in isolation, devastating in aggregate. He reached for the bottle of bourbon kept in his desk drawer. It wasn't yet noon, but some days required chemical fortification to face one's reflection. The Oak Ridge Elementary cafeteria buzzed with the controlled chaos of lunchtime. Frank observed from his position near the exit, Attention focused on Emma Miller, who sat alone at a corner table reading a book propped against her milk carton. The oversized military jacket hung from her small frame, its sleeves rolled up multiple times to free her hands. Frank noted how she positioned herself, back to the wall, clear sightlines to all entrances, minimal blind spots, unconscious tactical positioning, the instinctive behavior of someone accustomed to being targeted. The approach of Nathan Porter and his entourage drew Frank's attention. The mayor's son moved with the practiced confidence of inherited privilege, flanked by Olivia Bennett and two other children from River Heights families. Their trajectory aimed directly for Emma's isolated table. Frank started forward, then checked himself. Direct intervention would only escalate the situation, marking Emma for increased attention. Sometimes the best position was observation, gathering intelligence before committing to action. "Hey, Miller," Nathan called, loud enough for surrounding tables to hear. "I hear your dad's coming up in the Veterans Day Assembly. That true?" Emma looked up from her book, her expression guarded but composed. "I don't know anything about that. My dad says General Harrison specifically asked about military families," Nathan continued, settling uninvited across from her. "But you need proof of service for that. Real records, not just some old jacket." Frank watched Emma's hands tighten on her book, knuckles whitening, but her face remaining neutral. Impressive control for a 10-year-old. "I have his service records," she replied evenly. Nathan exchanged glances with Olivia, clearly not expecting this response. "Like what? Anyone can fake papers." Emma reached into her backpack and withdrew a laminated card. Military ID, Frank recognized from across the room. Her father's, most likely, preserved as a tangible connection to his memory. "This isn't fake," she said, her voice steady. "Neither is his Bronze Star or his SEAL qualification badge." The mention of specific decorations and qualifications caught Nathan off guard. He recovered quickly, scorn replacing momentary uncertainty. "SEALs," he scoffed. "That's like the toughest military unit. No offense, but look at you. No way your genes come from some elite soldier." Frank had heard enough. He moved toward the table with deliberate steps, his presence immediately noticed by the surrounding students. A hush spread outward like ripples in still water. "Problem here?" he asked, his tone conversational, but carrying the subtle edge of authority that needed no volume for emphasis. Nathan glanced up, momentary defiance flashing across his features before something in Frank's eyes, the flat, evaluating gaze of a predator, made him reconsider. "No problem, sir," Nathan replied, standing. "Just talking about Veterans Day." "Glad to hear it," Frank said. "I'm sure you're all excited to learn about the sacrifices that secured your freedom." The children dispersed, Nathan shooting a final glare at Emma before rejoining his usual social circle. Frank remained standing beside Emma's table, not speaking immediately, giving her space to compose herself. "You okay?" he asked finally, keeping his tone neutral. Emma nodded, carefully returning the military ID to her backpack. "Yes, sir." "That's your father's ID?" "Yes, sir. My mom gave it to me when I turned 8. Said I was old enough to keep it safe." Frank nodded, understanding the significance of such trust. "Your jacket, that patch on the left side, do you know what it means?" Emma's hand moved unconsciously to the faded emblem, fingers tracing its outline through the worn fabric. "Dad called it the Chimera, from Greek mythology, a beast with 3 heads. Lion, goat, serpent." Her voice took on a practiced quality, reciting information clearly told to her many times. "He said it meant they could fight anywhere, land, sea, air." Frank felt a surge of respect for James Miller. Even with young children, he had found ways to share aspects of his classified work through mythology and symbolism. He was right, Frank confirmed. The Chimera unit was special, even within the SEALs. Emma's eyes widened slightly, hearing confirmation of something she had clearly wondered about for years. "You were in it too?" Frank hesitated, operational security warring with the need for trust. "I worked with your father. He was a good man, one of the best I served with." Emma studied him with an intensity beyond her years, as if cataloging his features for future reference. "Why are people suddenly interested in Dad's jacket now, after all this time?" The question revealed an awareness that impressed Frank. She had noticed the pattern, connected the timing. Sharp kid. James would be proud. Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried, he answered carefully, especially when it involves people in positions of power. Emma nodded, seeming to accept this partial answer. Are you going to be at the Veterans Day Assembly when General Harrison comes? Front row, Frank confirmed. In fact, I'd like you to meet me before the assembly. There are some things about your father's service I think you should know. He wrote his cell number on a napkin and slid it across the table. If anything unusual happens, or if anyone bothers you or your mother, call me. Anytime, day or night. Emma took the napkin, folding it carefully before tucking it into her jacket pocket. Mom says I shouldn't talk to strangers about Dad. Your mother's smart, Frank agreed. But I'm not a stranger. I'm your father's brother in arms. That makes us family in a way that matters to people like us. A small smile, the first Frank had seen from her, briefly transformed Emma's serious expression. That's what Dad used to say, that his SEAL team was family. He was right about that too. Frank straightened, nodding toward her book. Finish your lunch. Learning's important. As he resumed his post near the exit, Frank watched Emma return to her reading with slightly more relaxed posture. The brief exchange had established a foundation of trust, crucial for what might lie ahead. His phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number. Surveillance identified on your truck. Countermeasures advised. Harrison's warning confirmed what Frank already suspected. Blackwood's team was watching. The stakes were escalating faster than anticipated. He deleted the message, then scanned the cafeteria once more. Nathan Porter was watching him, the boy's expression calculating beyond his years. The son learning the father's political instincts early, evaluating allies and threats, measuring influence and vulnerability. Frank held the boy's gaze until Nathan looked away first. A small victory, but in the subtle warfare of influence and intimidation, such moments mattered. The message was clear. I see you. I'm watching. The battle lines for Veterans Day were being drawn, invisible to most, but increasingly evident to those involved. 3 days remained before Harrison's arrival. 3 days to prepare Emma and Catherine Miller for whatever Blackwood had planned. It wouldn't be enough time, but then it never was in operations that mattered. Catherine Miller's double shift at the Sunrise Diner had stretched past midnight, her feet aching as she climbed the metal steps to her trailer. The porch light illuminated Frank Harrington sitting in one of her plastic chairs, his stillness suggesting he had been there for some time. Breaking and entering is illegal, even for ex-military, she said, keys jingling in her hand. I didn't break anything, Frank replied without moving, and I'm not inside. Despite her exhaustion, Catherine felt a smile tug at her lips. Semantics, what are you doing here at this hour? Security sweep. You've had visitors. Her smile vanished. What? Who? Professional, subtle entry, electronics, sweep. They didn't take anything, just looked. Frank stood, his large frame silhouetted against the porch light. Is Emma asleep? Mrs. Tanner from 3 trailers down is watching her. Catherine unlocked the door, gesturing him inside. Talk quietly. The trailer's interior remained as neat as Frank remembered, despite clear evidence of a search by experienced hands. Slight misalignments of picture frames, barely perceptible disturbances in dust patterns, a drawer closed not quite completely. They were looking for the USB drive, Frank said, keeping his voice low. Where is it now? Catherine opened a heating vent near the floor, reaching inside to extract the small device. James taught me a few tricks. This place has 5 hiding spots that look like they could be hiding spots. Those they found, this one they didn't. Frank nodded approvingly. Smart. We need to look at what's on it now before they come back. Catherine hesitated, clutching the drive. I've kept this hidden for 7 years. What's changed? Everything. Frank explained his meeting with Harrison, the revelation about Operation Mirage, Blackwood's involvement both past and present. They're afraid of what's on that drive because Harrison is planning to go public at the Veterans Day Assembly. Catherine sank into a chair, the weight of revelation pressing her down. All these years, I thought it was just classified, normal secrecy, not this. James discovered American officials supplied chemical weapons technology to Saddam Hussein, Frank said, his voice grim. The same weapons coalition forces were supposedly protecting the world from. The same weapons that later killed our own troops. and they murdered him for finding out. It wasn't a question. The certainty in Catherine's voice reflected years of suspicion finally confirmed. Yes. The simple affirmation hung in the air, brutal in its clarity. Catherine stared at the USB drive in her palm, small, innocuous, yet powerful enough to destroy careers and legacies built over decades. What happens if we look at this? She asked finally. We get leverage, Frank replied. Insurance. The same reason James hid it in the first place. Catherine nodded, decision made. She moved to a small desk where an aging laptop sat closed. This was James's. I've kept it functional. Seems appropriate. The computer booted slowly, its dated hardware struggling with even basic operations. When the login screen appeared, Catherine entered a password without hesitation. His service number, plus my birthday, she explained. He used it for everything that mattered. The USB drive contained a single encrypted file. Another password prompt appeared. This one I don't know, Catherine admitted. Frank studied the screen, military memory surfacing through decades of civilian life. Try Chimera plus his SEAL class number. Catherine raised an eyebrow. How would you know that? Standard protocol for our unit. Primary password personal, secondary operational. She entered the combination. The file opened, revealing dozens of photographs and documents, facility schematics, shipping manifests, technical specifications for chemical weapons production equipment. My God, Catherine whispered, scrolling through evidence documenting American technology transfers to Iraq's chemical weapons program. These have dates from the mid-1980s. Frank leaned closer, recognizing formats and classifications from his time in military intelligence. Export approvals with Pentagon signatures, technical advisors, American contractors, shipping routes through Jordan and Kuwait. The evidence was comprehensive and damning. James Miller had documented not just the existence of the program, but the entire chain of American involvement, from corporate boardrooms to government offices. The last file, Catherine said, opening a Word document simply titled Read a Doc. James Miller's final message filled the screen. If you're reading this, something happened to me. These files prove American officials supplied Saddam Hussein with chemical weapons to technology during the Iran-Iraq War. The same officials now leading the coalition against him. I've sent copies to trusted contacts with instructions to release if anything happens to Catherine or our child. Names to investigate. Charles Blackwood, CIA, Senator William Harrison, Ihasha Marshfain, Armed Services Committee, General Robert Harrison, Special Operations Command, Lawrence Mercer, Defense Department. Catherine, I'm sorry, I love you both more than anything. Do what you think is right. James Frank stepped back, processing the implications. Harrison's brother was on the list, the senator. Can we trust Harrison? Catherine asked, her voice tight with controlled emotion. After this? I don't know, Frank admitted. But he's dying, and men facing death often seek absolution. He gestured to the screen. James was thorough. This is enough to destroy them all. Catherine closed the laptop, her expression hardening into resolve. Then why haven't they killed us already? They've had years. Because James was smarter than they expected. His insurance policy, the copies sent to contacts. As long as you and Emma were alive and unharmed, those copies stayed secure. But Frank's admiration for his fallen teammate deepened. He protected you from beyond the grave. Until now, Catherine added, until Emma started wearing his jacket with the Chimera patch, until Harrison decided to cleanse his conscience. Yes, Frank checked his watch, 0130. You need to get Emma. Pack essentials only. You're not staying here tonight. Where would we go? I can't afford a hotel, and they'd find us anyway. I have a place, Frank assured her. Somewhere they won't think to look. As Catherine gathered her purse and keys, Frank moved to the window, scanning the darkened trailer park with practiced precision. The sedan was back, parked at the entrance, its occupant likely monitoring rather than preparing immediate action. His phone buzzed with another text from Harrison. Blackwood's team moving tonight. Get them out. Frank deleted the message, jaw tightening. The timeline was accelerating. Harrison must have leaked something, deliberately or accidentally, that spooked Blackwood into action. Change of plans, he told Catherine. We leave now. Call Mrs. Tanner. Tell her you're coming for Emma immediately. Family emergency. Catherine didn't question the urgency in his voice, already dialing as she moved toward the door. Frank knew they had minutes, perhaps less. Blackwood's operatives were professionals. They would approach with caution, but overwhelming force. Two targets, minimal security, isolated location. A simple extraction operation. Except they didn't know what Frank knew, that a retired SEAL never truly retired, that the instincts, the training, the readiness remained dormant but intact, waiting for the moment when survival once again became the only mission that mattered. Emma woke to her mother's urgent whisper, confusion giving way to alertness as she registered the tension in Catherine's posture. "Pack your backpack," her mother instructed quietly. "Essentials only. We need to go." Questions formed and died unasked as Emma recognized the expression on her mother's face, the same one she'd worn during their hasty departure from Norfolk 2 years earlier. She slid from Mrs. Tanner's guest bed and reached for her father's jacket, pulled over the borrowed pajamas without hesitation. "Mr. Harrington is with us," Catherine added, helping Emma gather her things. "He's a friend of your father's. We can trust him." Emma nodded, processing this confirmation of what she had already intuited. The security officer's recognition of the patch, his questions about her father, the connections had been obvious to her, even if adults thought children noticed nothing. They slipped out Mrs. Tanner's back door, the elderly woman watching from her kitchen with concerned eyes but asking no questions. Some things were better not known. Frank Harrington waited in the shadows behind the trailer, his stillness making him nearly invisible against the tree line. He nodded once at Emma, his expression serious but calm. "Stay close," he instructed, voice barely above a whisper. "Step where I step." Complete silence. Emma followed precisely, placing her feet in Frank's footprints as they moved through the wooded area behind the trailer park. Her mother came behind, less practiced, but making a credible effort at stealth. They reached Frank's truck, parked not on the street but on a service road behind the property. Forethought that impressed Emma. As they approached, Frank raised his hand in a halt signal, dropping to one knee to examine the vehicle. "They've been here," he said, pointing to nearly invisible marks on the door handle. "Tracker, probably." He reached beneath the truck's chassis, fingers finding and removing a small magnetic device from the wheel well. Without comment, he attached it to a passing delivery truck, slowing for a stop sign. "That buys us time," he explained, opening the doors for them. "But we can't take this vehicle far. I have alternatives." They drove in silence for several minutes, Frank taking a complex road of back roads and service lanes that seemed random but clearly followed some strategic pattern. Emma watched from the back seat, noting how he regularly checked mirrors and scanned surrounding vehicles. "Where are we going?" Catherine finally asked. "Jackson Whitaker's place," Frank replied. "Former Marine Force recon. Lives off the grid, 10 miles outside town. No electronic signature, no connection to me in any database they'd check." "Can we trust him?" Catherine's question carried the wariness of someone who had learned trust came with risks. "With our lives," Frank answered simply. He served with James in Bud's training before they went to different units. He'll understand what this is about. Emma processed this information, adding it to her mental collection of fragments about her father's life. Bud is a basic underwater demolition of SEAL training. She had researched it extensively, reading everything available about the grueling selection process that forged the Navy's elite special operations forces. "Mr. Harrington," she said, speaking for the first time since leaving the trailer park. "Was my dad really in a secret unit? Is that why we keep having to move?" Frank met her eyes in the rearview mirror, his expression softening slightly. "Yes, the Chimera unit handled missions too sensitive for official acknowledgement. Your father was one of the best, smart, methodical, always thinking 3 steps ahead." Emma nodded, satisfaction warming her despite their circumstances. Confirmation of what she had always believed, always defended against doubters and mockers. "Did he die on a mission?" she asked, ignoring her mother's sharp intake of breath. Frank's gaze flicked to Catherine, seeking permission. At her reluctant nod, he continued. "Yes, Operation Mirage in Iraq. He discovered something powerful people wanted kept secret." Frank's voice remained steady, matter of fact rather than condescending. "He died protecting that information, and he put measures in place to protect you and your mother." "The USB drive," Emma said, connecting pieces. "The one in the picture frame." Catherine turned in her seat, surprise evident. You knew about that? Emma shrugged, the oversized jacket shifting around her shoulders. Dad showed me where it was before he left. Said it was our insurance policy. I figured you knew too. Frank's low chuckle broke the tension. Like father, like daughter, always thinking ahead. Their conversation paused as Frank turned onto an unmarked dirt road, headlights illuminating dense forest on both sides. After nearly a mile, a small cabin appeared, its windows dark but smoke curling from the chimney. Frank flashed his headlights in a specific pattern, 2 long, 3 short, 2 long. A matching sequence of flashes came from inside the cabin. That's our welcome, Frank explained, parking behind the structure where the vehicle wouldn't be visible from the road. Jackson's expecting us. The cabin door opened as they approached, revealing a bear of a man with a full gray beard and the solid frame of someone who maintained military fitness decades after discharge. A shotgun rested casually in the crook of his arm, not pointed at them, but ready if needed. Frank Harrington, the man said, his voice a gravel rumble. Been a few years. Too many, Jackson, Frank replied. Thanks for taking us in. Jackson nodded, his keen eyes moving to Catherine and Emma. Recognition flashed across his features as he took in Emma's jacket. Miller's kid, he said, not a question. Seen pictures. Got your dad's eyes. Emma straightened slightly under his evaluation, pride replacing the fear and confusion of their hasty departure. Jackson was your dad's swim buddy and buds, Frank explained. They went through Hell Week together. Second phase nearly killed us both, Jackson confirmed, stepping back to admit them. James pulled me through the surf torture. Wouldn't let me quit when hypothermia set in. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly comfortable, clean, well-maintained, with modern amenities that belied its rustic exterior. A ham radio setup occupied one corner, alongside communications equipment more sophisticated than Emma expected. Secure landline, Jackson explained, following her gaze. No cell service, no internet, can't hack what isn't connected. We need to stay off the radar for 48 hours, Frank explained, until Veterans Day. Jackson nodded, requiring no further explanation. Guest room's ready. Perimeter sensors are active. Anyone approaches within half a mile will know. As Catherine helped Emma settle into the small but comfortable guest room, Frank and Jackson conferred in low voices by the radio equipment. Blackwood's running this personally, Frank explained. Harrison's gone public with his terminal diagnosis. Plans to make full disclosure at the Veterans Day ceremony. Bold play, Jackson commented. But what risky? Blackwood won't let him reach the microphone. That's what I'm counting on, Frank replied. If they move against a 4-star general in public, they expose themselves. Jackson stroked his beard thoughtfully. And if they take him out quietly beforehand, then we have the USB drive, insurance policy activated. Always 3 steps ahead, Jackson said, nodding approvingly. What's the play for Veterans Day? Frank outlined his strategy, straightforward yet flexible, with contingencies for various scenarios. Jackson listened attentively, offering tactical refinements based on his knowledge of the terrain and local resources. As they finalized details, Emma appeared in the doorway, her small frame still swallowed by her father's jacket, but her posture reflecting a determination beyond her years. I want to help, she said simply. Frank and Jackson exchanged glances, recognizing in her expression the same resolute focus they had seen in James Miller during operations where failure meant death. Your job is to stay safe, Frank began, but Emma shook her head. Dad left me a message in the jacket, she said. I found it last week, sewn into the lining, coordinates and a code phrase. Frank straightened, instantly alert. Show me. Imama led them to the guest room where she had laid the jacket on the bed. With careful fingers, she peeled back a section of the interior lining, revealing numbers written in faded ink on the fabric beneath. 34 DG 57 14.2 and 86 DG 34 12.8 W, Frank read aloud. And the phrase? Chimeras never die, Emma replied. It's his handwriting. I recognize it from his letters. Frank and Jackson shared another look, this one charged with dawning comprehension. Those coordinates, Jackson said slowly. That's the old munitions bunker on the North Ridge, Frank finished, decommissioned in the 80s. Dad took me hiking there once, Emma added. before his last deployment, said it was our special place because you could see 3 states from the ridgetop. The pieces aligned with an almost audible click. James Miller's final failsafe, hidden in plain sight on the jacket he knew his child would inherit. A message across time, father to daughter, with Frank Harrington as the intended decoder. Smart, Frank said softly, respect deepening for his fallen teammate. The one place Blackwood would never think to check, a location with personal rather than tactical significance. We need to go there, Emma insisted. Before the Veterans Day assembly, Frank knelt to her eye level, his expression serious but gentle. Emma, this could be dangerous. Your father wouldn't want you taking risks. My father, Emma replied with quiet conviction, would want the truth to come out. He hid something at those coordinates, something important enough to encode in his jacket, something he knew I would find when I was ready. The logic was flawless, the determination unshakable. Frank recognized in Emma Miller the same qualities that had made her father one of the finest operators he'd ever served with: intelligence, courage, and the moral clarity that no amount of political pressure could corrupt. First light tomorrow, he decided. We checked the coordinates. As Emma returned to bed, Frank stood by the cabin's front window, scanning the darkness beyond. The pieces were moving rapidly now, the endgame approaching. Harrison arriving tomorrow, Veterans Day the day after. Whatever James Miller had hidden at those coordinates might tip the balance between justice and continued conspiracy. Behind him, Jackson checked his weapons with the methodical precision of a man who understood their potential necessity. Just like old times, Jackson observed quietly, except we're 30 years older and facing our own government instead of foreign hostiles. The mission remains the same, Frank replied. Protect the innocent. Uphold the oath we took. To the Constitution, not to any individual or administration. Outside, the Tennessee night pressed against the cabin windows, the darkness concealing both threats and opportunities. Within 48 hours, the truth about Operation Mirage would either emerge into the light or be buried forever beneath another layer of classification and convenience. Frank Harrington had spent 32 years honoring his oath of secrecy. Now, honoring James Miller's memory required breaking that silence, whatever the cost. Dawn broke over the Tennessee hills in ribbons of amber and gold, the morning mist clinging to valleys like memories reluctant to fade. Frank Harrington stood on Jackson's cabin porch, coffee mug warming his hands as he surveyed the terrain with a soldier's eye, identifying approaches, calculating fields of fire, assessing natural cover. Behind him, the cabin door opened as Catherine joined him, her own coffee steaming in the crisp morning air. Emma's getting ready, she said, voice still rough with too little sleep. She insisted on wearing James's jacket. Frank nodded, unsurprised. The jacket's more than a memento to her. It's a connection to him, to who he was. She never really knew him, Catherine replied, a familiar sadness threading through her words. He deployed when she was 3, died when she was 5. All she has are fragments. Stories I've told, photographs, that jacket. Sometimes fragments are enough, Frank said, watching the mist shift in the valley below. I've seen her eyes, her determination. She has his spirit. They stood in companionable silence, the peaceful moment belying the day's dangerous undertaking. Jackson emerged from the tree line, returning from his perimeter check with a hunting rifle slung across his back. All clear, he reported. No movement on the access roads. If they found your truck, they haven't traced it here yet. They will, Frank replied with the calm certainty of experience. Blackwood's thorough. We need to move soon. Jackson nodded toward his battered Jeep parked beside the woodshed. Vehicles ready, full tank, provisions packed. Good man. Frank finished his coffee in a single swallow. Let's brief Emma before we go. She deserves to understand what we're walking into. Inside the cabin's main room, they found Emma studying a topographical map spread across the dining table, her small finger tracing ridgelines and valleys with unexpected precision. The coordinates are here, she said without looking up, indicating a point on the northern ridge. About 3 miles of hiking from the nearest service road. Frank exchanged glances with Jackson, both men recognizing the tactical assessment of terrain, an inherited skill neither had expected to see in a 10-year-old girl. That's right, Frank confirmed, approaching the table. How did you know to check the topographical features? Dad taught me, Emma replied simply. When we'd go hiking, he'd show me how to read maps, identify landmarks, calculate distances. She looked up, her expression earnest. He said knowing the land might save my life someday. Catherine's hand went to her mouth, a small gesture of surprise and realization. What she had taken for simple father-daughter outings had been something more. Preparation, insurance, knowledge transfer disguised as recreation. Your father was preparing you, Frank said gently. Even then, he suspected his work might someday follow him home. Emma nodded, accepting this without visible distress. Is that why we keep moving? Why Mom works different jobs every couple of years? Yes, Catherine admitted, joining them at the table. After your father died, strange things happened. Job offers withdrawn without explanation. Apartment applications denied. Bank loans rejected. It was easier to keep moving than to fight a system we couldn't see. Frank studied the map, professional assessment, momentarily overshadowing the emotional weight of Catherine's revelation. The approach from the south gives us better cover. Old-growth forest, minimal clearing. We can park here. He indicated a point on the service road. An approach on foot. 3 hours accounting for security measures. What do you think we'll find? Catherine asked. Something worth killing for, Frank replied, meeting her eyes directly. Something James believed would protect you both if the worst happened. Emma folded the map with careful precision. I'm ready. Frank knelt to her eye level, his weathered face solemn. Emma, I need you to understand something. Today is dangerous. We're moving against powerful people who have spent decades burying what your father discovered. I'll protect you with my life, but I need your absolute obedience. No questions, no hesitation if I give an order. Can you do that? Maman straightened, her father's oversized jacket somehow lending her small frame an aura of determination rather than diminishing it. Yes, sir, I understand. Frank held her gaze a moment longer, then nodded once, satisfied. Good, let's move out. As they loaded into Jackson's Jeep, Frank's phone buzzed with a text message. Harrison's number, the message typically cryptic. Arrive Riverbend, meeting set, surveillance heavy, proceed with caution. Frank deleted the message after memorizing it, his jaw tightening. Harrison's presence would draw Blackwood's attention, potentially diverting resources from their expedition to the ridge. A tactical advantage, but also confirmation that the endgame was approaching faster than anticipated. Jackson drove with the careful precision of a man who understood terrain as a tactical element, choosing routes that minimize exposure while maximizing speed. The Jeep's rugged suspension absorbed the punishment of backcountry roads as they climbed into the hills north of Riverbend. 3 vehicles on R6, Jackson reported calmly, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. Black SUV, 2 sedans, government plates on the lead vehicle. Frank nodded, unsurprised. Blackwood's people. They found us. Catherine's hand tightened around Emma's, but the girl remained calm, her eyes focused on the ridgeline ahead where her father's final message waited. Plan B, Frank instructed, reaching for his pack. Next bend. Jackson accelerated slightly, maintaining control on the winding road. As they rounded a sharp curve, he abruptly pulled onto a narrow forestry access path, the Jeep's 4-wheel drive engaging as they bounced over rough terrain. 3 minutes, Frank said, checking his watch. Then we split up. The Jeep pushed deeper into the forest, branches scraping against the windows as Jackson navigated the overgrown trail with practiced skill. After precisely 3 minutes, he stopped in a small clearing, barely large enough for the vehicle. Catherine, Emma, you're with me, Frank instructed, gathering his pack. Jackson, lead them on the southern approach. 2-mile detour, then converge at the coordinates. Jackson nodded, understanding the strategy. Divide the pursuit, complicate their tracking, provide multiple avenues of escape if needed. 3 shots if you need extraction, Jackson confirmed, checking his rifle. Radio silence otherwise. Frank helped Catherine and Emma from the vehicle, noting with approval that Emma moved silently through the underbrush, her footfalls carefully placed to minimize noise. Keep low, move steady, he instructed as Jackson drove away, the Jeep's engine sound fading into the forest. Follow my exact path. They moved through the forest with measured pace, Frank setting a route that balanced speed with security, avoiding open areas, utilizing natural depressions, maintaining tree cover whenever possible. Catherine struggled occasionally with the rough terrain, But Emma adapted with surprising agility, her small size allowing her to navigate obstacles that challenged the adults. After 30 minutes of steady hiking, Frank halted them in a dense thicket, his raised hands signaling for absolute silence. Distant engine sounds filtered through the forest, vehicles on the service road, moving slowly, searching. "They've split up," Frank whispered when the sounds faded. "Two teams, covering both approaches." "How many?" Catherine asked, her voice barely audible. "At least 6 operators, professional equipment. Blackwood isn't taking chances." Emma's expression remained calm, but her eyes held questions she was disciplined enough not to ask aloud. Frank recognized the look, the same one he'd seen on her father's face before high-risk operations, calculating odds, assessing variables. "We'll be fine," he assured her, checking his compass. "Your father chose this location for a reason. He knew the terrain, the approaches. Whatever he left here, he made sure it would be defensible." They continued their ascent, the ridge growing closer with each careful step. Frank maintained a vigilant scan of their surroundings, attuned to the forest's natural rhythms. Bird song, wind patterns, the movement of small animals. Any disruption would signal human presence long before visual confirmation. The radio at his belt crackled softly. Jackson's signal, transmitted in Morse code rather than voice to minimize detection. 3 short bursts, arrival at the designated coordinates. "We're close," Frank told his companions. 500 meters to the rendezvous point. As they crested a small rise, the ridgeline came into view, silhouetted against the late morning sky. Emma's pace quickened slightly, her determination visibly strengthening as they approached their destination. A single shot echoed across the valley. Frank dropped instantly to a crouch, gesturing for Catherine and Emma to take cover behind a fallen tree. The shot had come from the direction of their objective, a high-caliber rifle, precision fire rather than suppressive. "Jackson," Frank whispered, drawing the pistol he carried concealed beneath his jacket. They found him first. 2 more shots followed in rapid succession, Jackson's signal for extraction, for danger. Frank's jaw tightened as he assessed their options, the tactical situation deteriorating rapidly. "Change of plans," he decided, turning to Catherine. "You and Emma circle east, stay in the tree line. I'll create a diversion, draw their attention west." "No," Emma said, her voice quiet but firm. "Dad's coordinates are specific. Whatever he left is at that exact spot. We need to get there." Frank studied her face, recognizing James Miller's stubborn determination in his daughter's eyes. The mission parameters remained clear, despite the complications. Reach the coordinates, recover whatever James had hidden there. "Okay," he conceded, "but we approach with extreme caution. I go first, you stay 10 meters behind. If I signal stop, you freeze immediately. Understood?" Both nodded, Catherine's expression showing fear, but also resolve. They moved forward with increased stealth, Frank leading them on a curved approach that utilized the natural contours of the landscape for maximum cover. The abandoned munitions bunker appeared through the trees, a concrete structure partially reclaimed by nature, its entrance obscured by decades of vegetation growth. No movement visible, but the stillness felt artificial, tense with human presence. Frank halted them at the edge of the clearing, scanning the surroundings with methodical precision. The shot had come from the western approach, likely a sniper positioned to cover the main entrance. Jackson had encountered them, possibly drawn their fire deliberately to warn Frank's group. "There," Emma whispered, pointing not at the bunker's main entrance, but at a small depression 50 meters to the east. Barely visible through the underbrush, what appeared to be a maintenance access point or emergency exit. Frank nodded approvingly. James would have known about secondary access points, would have factored them into his planning. The coordinates hadn't specified the bunker's main entrance, but this alternative approach, less obvious, less likely to be monitored. "Wait here," he instructed, moving forward in a low crouch, utilizing natural cover as he approached the depression Emma had identified. The access point proved to be a partially collapsed maintenance shaft, its metal door rusted but intact. Frank examined it carefully for signs of recent use, finding nothing obvious. No disturbed vegetation, no fresh scratches on the oxidized metal. He returned to Catherine and Emma, his assessment complete. Secondary entrance, Tight fit, but passable. No obvious surveillance. This is our best option. How do we know it's not a trap? Catherine asked, maternal protectiveness evident in her voice. We don't, Frank admitted. But James chose this location, those specific coordinates for Emma to find. He wouldn't have let his daughter into danger without good reason. Emma stepped forward, her small hand finding Frank's larger one with surprising firmness. I trust Dad, she said simply, and I trust you. The simple declaration carried weight beyond the girl's years, faith inherited rather than earned, passed from father to brothers in arms to daughter in an unbroken line of trust. Let's go, Frank decided, leading them toward the access shaft. The maintenance entrance proved challenging even for Emma's small frame, the rusted ladder descending into darkness that seemed to consume the weak beams of their flashlights. Frank went first, testing each rung before allowing his full weight to rest on the decades-old metal. The bunker's interior smelled of damp concrete and abandoned purposes, the air heavy with stillness, disturbed only by their cautious movements. Emergency lighting systems had failed decades ago, leaving them dependent on flashlights that created more shadows than illumination. The coordinates are specific to this level, Emma whispered, checking the small compass she carried. Northeast corner, behind the auxiliary generator. Frank led them through the bunker's maze-like interior, past empty storage racks and abandoned equipment covered in dust and cobwebs. The auxiliary generator room appeared smaller than expected, its machinery long since stripped of valuable components by scavengers. There, Emma said, approaching the back wall where a series of ventilation ducts created a narrow space between machinery and concrete. This is it, exactly the coordinates Dad gave. Frank examined the area, finding nothing immediately obvious. No hidden compartment, no loose stones, no indications of disturbance in the decades of accumulated dust. Are you sure? Catherine asked, doubt creeping into her voice. Emma nodded firmly, running her hands along the wall with methodical patience. Dad said the chimera had 3 heads but 1 heart. There's something here. Frank joined her examination, professional thoroughness complementing childish determination. The wall seemed solid, the ventilation ducts secure in their mountings. Wait, Frank said, his fingers detecting a slight anomaly in the metal seam of the central duct. This section has been modified. He applied pressure to the duct's seam, feeling resistance followed by a subtle mechanical click. A small panel slid open, revealing a space just large enough to contain a metal ammunition box. Military issue, weatherproofed, secured with a combination lock. He knew we'd find it, Emma whispered, eyes wide with vindication. All these years, he was waiting for us to come. Frank examined the lock, standard military issue, 3-digit combination. We need the code. Chimeras never die, Emma said, recalling the phrase from the jacket lining. That must be a clue. Frank shook his head. That's not a number combination. Emma's brow furrowed in concentration, thinking like her father, connecting pieces across time and circumstance. His service number, she suggested, the last 3 digits. Mom says he used it for everything important. Catherine provided the numbers, Frank's fingers turning the tumblers with careful precision. The lock remained secure. Something else, Frank muttered, thinking through James Miller's methodical mind. Something Emma would know. My birthday, Emma said suddenly. Dad always said I was his greatest mission. She closed her eyes, accessing a memory. Dad had a system. He said every important date had a code. For my birthday, it was 784. Frank entered the numbers, feeling the subtle give of mechanisms aligning properly. The lock opened with a satisfying click. Inside the ammunition box, they found a sealed waterproof bag containing a mini camcorder, outdated technology from the early 1990s, and a handwritten letter in a sealed envelope addressed simply, Emma. Frank handled the camcorder carefully, checking its condition. Battery's dead, but the tape's intact. This is what he wanted preserved. Emma opened the letter with trembling fingers, unfolding pages covered in her father's handwriting. Strong, precise strokes that had withstood the passage of years. My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, you've grown into the remarkable person I always knew you would become. You're wearing my jacket, you've decoded my message, and you've found your way to this place that was special to us. I'm so proud of you. The tape in this camera contains evidence of what really happened during Operation Mirage. It shows American officials negotiating with Iraqi representatives about chemical weapons technology, filmed secretly during my final mission. It proves they sold the technology, then later used its existence as justification for war. I knew recording this would likely cost my life, but some truths demand witnesses. Some lies are too dangerous to remain unchallenged. I've entrusted this to you rather than your mother because Catherine deserves deniability. The men responsible wouldn't hesitate to hurt her to preserve their secret. If you're reading this with Frank Harrington, then my faith in my brothers was well placed. Trust him, he knows what to do with this evidence. Remember always, you are my legacy, not this tape. Live with courage, speak truth even when it costs you, and never let anyone tell you that justice is less important than convenience or national security. I love you eternally, Dad. Emma handed the letter to Frank, her eyes bright with unshed tears, but her composure intact. Her father's daughter in every way that mattered. He knew, she said simply. Frank nodded, understanding the complex emotions beneath those two words. James had known his discovery would likely cost his life, had prepared accordingly, had trusted his daughter to complete his mission 3 decades later. Your father was the best of us, Frank told her, carefully placing the camcorder and letter back in their waterproof protection. This is what Blackwood has been afraid of all these years, documented proof of their crimes, preserved beyond their reach. A sound from above interrupted their moment of discovery, boots on concrete, the unmistakable mechanical click of weapons being readied. We've got company, Frank said, securing the ammunition box and slinging it over his shoulder. Time to move. The maintenance shaft offered their only viable escape route, but returning the way they'd entered would lead them directly into Blackwood's team. Frank assessed their options with combat-honed calculation. There's a drainage system beneath this level, he said, leading them toward a different corridor. Cold War design included multiple egress options. We find the drainage access, we can exit the ridge on the northern face, away from their main force. They moved quickly through the bunker's maze-like interior, Frank navigating from memory of similar installations he'd studied during his military career. The drainage access appeared as expected, a narrow tunnel designed for water runoff, but large enough for human passage in emergency situations. It'll be tight, Frank warned, testing the rusted grate that covered the entrance. And dark. Stay close. Move quickly. No light unless absolutely necessary. The sounds of pursuit grew closer, professional operators moving with tactical discipline, sweeping the bunker systematically. Frank worked the grate free, creating an opening barely large enough for Catherine's shoulders. Emma first, he instructed. Then Catherine. I'll follow and replace the grate to slow them down. Emma slipped into the drainage tunnel without hesitation, her small frame navigating the confined space with determined efficiency. Catherine followed with greater difficulty, claustrophobia battling maternal instinct as she forced herself into the darkness. Frank's broader shoulders presented a greater challenge, but decades of military training had prepared him for contorting his body through unlikely spaces. He squeezed through the opening, pulling the grate back into approximate position behind him. The drainage tunnel stretched before them, a tube of absolute darkness that smelled of damp earth and decades of mineral deposits. Frank led them forward by touch alone, one hand on the tunnel wall, the other maintaining contact with Catherine ahead of him. 200 meters, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of their movement. Then we reached the northern exit. They proceeded in tense silence, every scrape of clothing against concrete magnified by the tunnel's acoustic properties. Behind them, muffled voices indicated Blackwood's team had discovered their means of escape, professionals who would not be long delayed by the replaced grate. The tunnel ended abruptly in another rusted grate, this one opening onto the northern face of the ridge. Frank worked it free with methodical haste, creating an opening that admitted blinding daylight after the tunnel's absolute darkness. Move, he ordered as soon as the opening was wide enough. Downslope, east-northeast heading. Use the tree line for cover. Emma emerged first, blinking in the sudden brightness, but orienting herself with surprising speed. Catherine followed, her movements hampered by exhaustion and the emotional weight of their discoveries. Frank's exit was less graceful, the ammunition box catching momentarily on the grate's edge before he worked it free with controlled force. As he regained his footing on the rocky slope, a sharp crack echoed across the ridge. Rifle fire, the bullet impacting stone inches from his position. "Sniper, western approach," he reported calmly, dropping to a crouch and pulling Catherine down beside him. "Move in 5-meter sprints. Trees are our objective." Emma was already moving, her father's oversized jacket flapping around her as she darted from cover to cover with instinctive tactical awareness. Catherine followed with less precision but equal determination. Maternal protection overriding fear. Another shot rang out, closer this time, the sniper adjusting, tracking their movement. Frank calculated distance and angle, identifying the shooter's likely position on an outcropping 300 meters west. The tree line beckoned 50 meters ahead, offering genuine cover rather than the scattered rocks and sparse vegetation of the ridge face. Frank maintained rear position, the ammunition box secure against his chest, his body between the sniper and his charges. A third shot kicked up earth at Frank's feet as he completed a sprint between cover positions. The sniper was good, professional, methodical, correcting with each shot. The next would likely find its mark unless something changed the equation. The answer came from an unexpected direction. 3 rapid shots from the eastern tree line, not aimed at Frank's group but at the sniper's position. Jackson, providing covering fire from his own approach. "Now," Frank ordered, abandoning measured movement for direct approach. "Straight to the trees, full sprint." They ran, abandoning caution for speed, Frank's larger stride allowing him to overtake Catherine and physically shield her during the final approach. Bullets impacted around them, the sniper returning fire against Jackson rather than continuing to track their movement. The tree line enveloped them in relative safety, dense foliage breaking visual contact with their pursuer. Jackson materialized from the undergrowth, his hunting rifle held with the practiced comfort of a lifetime outdoorsman. "Took your time," he remarked dryly, checking Catherine and Emma for injuries. 5-man team on the western approach, 2 more covering the main entrance. Professional equipment, military precision. "Blackwood's security contractors," Frank confirmed, securing the ammunition box in his pack. "Did you find what I asked about?" Jackson nodded, leading them deeper into the forest along a game trail barely visible to untrained eyes. "Ravine access point, half-mile northeast. Vehicle waiting." "Good man." They moved quickly but carefully, utilizing natural cover and minimizing noise. Behind them, radio communications indicated Blackwood's team coordinating their pursuit, professionals who understood containment tactics and would be establishing a perimeter even now. "We're not going to outrun them," Frank acknowledged as they paused to allow Catherine brief rest. "They have numbers, equipment, and air support incoming." "What's the play?" Jackson asked. Ever the pragmatic Marine. Frank checked his watch. 1100 hours. Veterans Day ceremony scheduled for 1000 tomorrow. Harrison already in town, under surveillance, but temporarily safe due to his public profile. "We split up," he decided. "You take Catherine and Emma to the secondary location. I'll lead them east with the ammunition box. Make them think I have the evidence." "And the actual evidence?" Jackson asked. Frank removed the camcorder from the box, securing it in an interior pocket of his jacket. "Goes with them. If I'm captured or killed, they still have what matters." Catherine shook her head firmly. "No, we stay together. James trusted you to protect us." "This is how I protect you," Frank replied, his tone gentle but brooking no argument. "Blackwood wants the evidence destroyed more than he wants you silenced. If I lead them away, give them a target to focus on, you have a better chance." Emma stepped forward, her small hand taking Frank's much larger one. "You're coming back," she said, not a question, but a statement of absolute certainty. "After you lose them, you're coming back for us." Frank smiled, recognizing James Miller's unshakable confidence in his daughter's eyes. "Yes, ma'am, that's the plan." "Promise," she insisted. "I promise," he replied, the words carrying the weight of military honor, a bond as sacred to men like Frank as any formal oath. Jackson outlined the route to their secondary location, an old hunting cabin owned by a fellow veteran, off-grid and unconnected to Jackson's known associates. The rendezvous plan established, Frank prepared to depart. 24 hours, he told them. "If I don't make contact by then, get the evidence to Harrison at the ceremony." Catherine embraced him briefly, the gesture conveying gratitude beyond words. Emma stood at attention, offering a solemn salute that Frank returned with equal seriousness. Chimera strong, she said, her father's unit motto a bond between them. Always, Frank agreed. Now move out. He watched them disappear into the forest, Jackson leading them on a carefully selected route that would minimize exposure while maximizing distance from Blackwood's teams. When they were safely away, Frank checked his equipment one final time, then moved deliberately eastward, leaving clear signs of passage that would draw pursuit in the opposite direction from his charges. The ammunition box hung conspicuously from his pack, visible to any observer with decent optics, a calculated invitation to pursuit. Within 20 minutes, Frank heard the unmistakable sounds of professionals tracking his movement, radio communications kept to minimum, hand signals and tactical positioning rather than verbal exchanges. Good. Blackwood's focus was where Frank wanted it, on him, not on Catherine and Emma. Now he needed to maintain that focus while gradually increasing distance between himself and his charges. The chase continued through midday and into afternoon, Frank staying just visible enough to maintain pursuit while utilizing terrain and forest craft to prevent capture. These were urban operators, skilled professionals but not woodsmen. Frank's decades in these hills gave him advantages their tactical gear and communications couldn't overcome. By late afternoon, he had led them nearly 7 miles east of the bunker, circling north toward the state forest boundary, where population thinned and surveillance became increasingly difficult. The primary pursuit team had dwindled from 5 to 3, the others presumably establishing containment positions or pursuing alternative leads. Frank allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. The plan was working, focus maintained on him, Catherine and Emma moving steadily towards safety, distance increasing with every hour. His radio crackled unexpectedly, an open frequency, unencrypted, bold. Whoever was calling wanted to be heard. Colonel Harrington, Charles Blackwood's voice, unmistakable despite the static. This pursuit is unnecessary. We can resolve our situation like professionals. Frank maintained silence, continuing his measured pace through the forest. Blackwood was fishing, attempting to establish communication while his operators triangulated the signal. I know what Miller found, Blackwood continued after a pause. I know what's on that tape, but you're a military man. You understand that sometimes national security requires difficult decisions. Still, Frank moved forward, ignoring the bait. Blackwood was trying to locate him through extended transmission, standard intelligence technique. Harrison is dying, Blackwood's voice persisted, an edge of frustration now evident. His confession would serve no purpose except to damage America's standing with our allies. Is that what you want? International humiliation? The destabilization of partnerships that have maintained peace for decades? Frank paused behind a massive oak, calculating his position relative to pursuit teams and potential extraction routes. Blackwood's attempt to engage him suggested increasing desperation, a positive development. The girl doesn't need to be involved, Blackwood continued, his voice softening to something resembling sincerity. She's an innocent. What would Miller want for his daughter? Public scrutiny? Media exploitation? Or a normal life with her future secured? The implied threat beneath the reasonable tone was unmistakable, a promise to make Emma's life difficult if Frank persisted, or comfortable if he cooperated. Frank's jaw tightened, anger flaring briefly before professional discipline reasserted control. Blackwood was revealing his own priorities, his own concerns, information Frank could use. The radio crackled again. $5 million, Colonel. Deposited wherever you designate. You hand over the evidence, we end this chase, everyone returns to their lives. No repercussions, no pursuit. A professional resolution. Frank allowed himself a grim smile. Blackwood was offering retirement money, a golden parachute for a man who had spent his post-military career in modest security work. The offer itself confirmed the tape's value, its authenticity, its power. Night was approaching, temperature dropping, as autumn reasserted itself after the day's unexpected warmth. Frank calculated his position, the distance to the nearest road, the likelihood of surveillance coverage. The decision crystallized with tactical clarity. He would maintain movement through nightfall, using darkness to slip containment, then circle back toward Riverbend. Catherine and Emma would be secure at the secondary location. The evidence protected, Tomorrow's Veterans Day ceremony offered the perfect opportunity. Public setting, media presence, Harrison's final stand, justice for James Miller, truth for his daughter, and accountability for men who had spent decades evading it. Frank resumed his steady pace through the gathering darkness, Blackwood's unanswered offer hanging in the cooling air behind him. Some prices were beyond negotiation, some values beyond compromise. The night embraced him like an old friend, darkness concealing his movement as he became ghost rather than quarry. Behind him, pursuers maintained professional discipline but faced increasing disadvantages. Unfamiliar terrain, falling temperatures, exhaustion from hours of tracking. Frank Harrington smiled into the darkness, feeling years fall away as the mission's parameters clarified into absolute focus. For the first time in decades, he was operating with moral clarity against a defined enemy, protecting innocence, serving justice rather than political expedience. Tomorrow, Veterans Day would honor not just those who had served, but those who had died defending truths too inconvenient for comfortable acknowledgement. James Miller would finally receive the recognition his sacrifice deserved. And Emma would know with absolute certainty that her father had been a hero, not just in the battlefield heroics that earned medals, but in the moral courage that had cost him everything except his daughter's enduring faith. Veterans Day dawned clear and cold over Riverbend, American flags snapping in the brisk November wind as the small town prepared for its annual ceremony. Oak Ridge Elementary's front lawn had been transformed overnight. Folding chairs arranged in precise rows, a stage erected and draped with patriotic bunting, sound system checked and rechecked by nervous technicians. Principal Morgan supervised last-minute preparations with the frantic energy of someone hosting dignitaries far above his usual jurisdiction. General Harrison's advance team had arrived at 0700, Secret Service personnel conducting security sweeps with professional thoroughness, while media representatives established camera positions under the watchful eyes of military public affairs officers. Frank Harrington observed these preparations from 2 blocks away, Jackson's binoculars allowing him detailed assessment of security positions, approaches, and potential complications. His night journey had been successful, evasion complete, pursuers left circling empty forest while he returned to Riverbend through back roads and game trails known only to lifelong residents. The secondary location had proven secure, Catherine and Emma waiting with the calm resolution of people who had accepted danger as the price of truth. The camcorder's evidence had been transferred to modern digital format, copies secured and distributed to trusted contacts, insurance against mishap or intervention. Now, as ceremony preparations entered final stages, Frank completed his own preparations in the apartment above Wilson's hardware store, a tactical position selected for its sight lines and multiple exit routes. "Security's tight," Jackson reported, lowering the binoculars. 2-layer perimeter, communications gear, counter-surveillance sweeps. Blackwood's people are running it, not regular Secret Service. Frank nodded, unsurprised. Expected. They'll control access, limit Harrison's movement, try to prevent any public statement that veers from approved script. "Can he break free from that?" Jackson asked. "He's a 4-star general with terminal cancer," Frank replied, checking his watch. "His legacy is all that matters to him now. He'll find a way." Catherine entered from the back room where Emma was preparing, her expression a complex mixture of determination and concern. "Are you sure this is the right approach? Exposing Emma to such public scrutiny?" Frank met her eyes directly. This was James's plan. Evidence preserved, truth revealed through proper channels. Emma completes his mission by bearing witness. Her presence makes this about justice for a fallen soldier, not political maneuvering. Catherine nodded, accepting his assessment, if not entirely comfortable with it. "She's ready, wearing his jacket, of course." "Of course," Frank agreed with a small smile. "Wouldn't be right without it." The ceremony was scheduled for 1,000 hours, Harrison's keynote address at 10:30. Frank checked his watch again. 0900. Time to move their pieces into position. "Jackson, you're on overwatch," and he instructed. "This position gives you sight lines to the entire ceremony." Catherine and Emma approached from the south entrance. "Time to arrive at 0945. I'll secure position near the stage. Maintain visual contact with Harrison." The plan was simple in concept, complex in execution. Create the opportunity for Harrison to speak freely. Ensure the evidence reached public awareness. Protect Emma and Catherine throughout. And if Blackwood's people moved against them, Frank's jaw tightened. Some lines could not be crossed, even in the name of national security. Some actions could not be forgiven, regardless of justification. At precisely 0930, Frank departed the hardware store, moving with the casual confidence of someone who belonged exactly where he was. His security uniform, pressed khakis and the button-down shirt bearing Oak Ridge Elementary's logo, provided perfect cover, allowing him to approach the ceremony through the same checkpoint where he normally reported for work. The security contractor checking credentials barely glanced at his ID badge, a familiar face requiring no additional scrutiny. Frank noted the oversight with professional disapproval, even as it served his purposes. The ceremony space filled steadily as Riverbend citizens arrived for the annual tradition. Veterans in various stages of age and formality occupied front rows, many wearing caps or jackets identifying their service era: Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan. The living history of American military engagement gathered to honor shared sacrifice despite political differences that might otherwise divide them. Frank positioned himself near the left side of the stage, angle selected for maximum visibility of both Harrison and the southern entrance, where Catherine and Emma would appear. His posture projected professional attention to security concerns, while his eyes continuously scanned for Blackwood's operatives among the growing crowd. Harrison arrived with appropriate military punctuality at 0945, his 4 stars gleaming on dress uniform shoulders that remained square despite his illness. Frank watched the general's procession with careful attention, noting the security details positioning, close enough for protection, not so close as to prevent all independent movement. Blackwood himself appeared moments later, his civilian attire immaculate, but his expression tense beneath practiced political smoothness. He positioned himself near the stage steps, controlling access to the microphone that would soon amplify Harrison's words to the assembled crowd. At 0950, Frank spotted Catherine and Emma approaching the southern entrance checkpoint. Emma walked with the solemn dignity of a child who understood her role in something important, her father's jacket hanging from her small frame like a banner of unfinished business. The security contractor at the checkpoint stopped them, examining the invitation Frank had provided through Jackson's veteran connections. After brief consultation with a superior, they were admitted, Catherine guided to general seating, Emma directed to the special section reserved for military families being recognized. Frank allowed himself momentary satisfaction. Phase 1 complete, all principals in position, ceremony proceeding according to established timeline. Now came the critical moment. Harrison's address, the public revelation, Blackwood's inevitable countermove. At precisely 1,000 hours, Principal Morgan approached the microphone, welcoming attendees to Oak Ridge Elementary's annual Veterans Day ceremony with nervous enthusiasm that betrayed his awareness of the event's unusual significance. Mayor Porter followed with brief remarks that seemed directed more at the media cameras than the assembled citizens. Political boilerplate about sacrifice and freedom. Frank divided his attention between the stage and Emma, who sat ramrod straight in the family recognition section, her father's jacket drawing occasional curious glances from surrounding attendees. She caught his eye across the distance, offering a small nod that conveyed more determination than a child her age should need to possess. At 10:25, the ceremonial recognitions began. Local veterans called forward by service era, applauded by the community that had often overlooked their contributions on ordinary days. Frank noted Blackwood's increasing tension as Harrison's introduction approached, the former CIA operative's hand occasionally touching his jacket where a communication device presumably waited. Then came the moment Frank had orchestrated every element to enable. Principal Morgan returned to the microphone, voice rising with genuine admiration. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my extraordinary honor to introduce our keynote speaker, 4-star General Robert Harrison, former commander of Special Operations Command and recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross. Please join me in welcoming General Harrison. Applause rippled through the crowd as Harrison approached the podium, his gait measured but determined despite the cancer consuming him from within. His eyes swept the audience with military assessment, pausing briefly on Emma in her oversized jacket before finding Frank's position with a small nod of recognition. Thank you, Principal Morgan, Harrison began, his voice carrying the natural authority of command. Citizens of Riverbend, honored veterans, distinguished guests, Veterans Day calls us to remember sacrifice, to honor those who served knowing the cost might be everything they held dear. Standard opening, Frank noted, watching Blackwood's posture relax slightly. Harrison was following the expected script, patriotic reflections appropriate for a school ceremony. Today I want to speak about a different kind of sacrifice, Harrison continued, his tone shifting subtly. The sacrifice of truth for convenience, the sacrifice of justice for expediency. Blackwood stiffened, hand moving to his communication device. Frank tensed, ready to move if necessary. 32 years ago, during Operation Desert Storm, a Navy SEAL named Lieutenant James Miller discovered evidence that American officials had supplied chemical weapons technology to Saddam Hussein's regime. Harrison stated clearly, abandoning prepared remarks entirely. The same weapons we were supposedly protecting the world from, the same weapons that later killed our own troops. A murmur passed through the crowd, confusion, disbelief, shock. Blackwood was speaking urgently into his communication device now, security personnel shifting positions around the perimeter. Lieutenant Miller documented this evidence at the cost of his own life, Harrison continued, voice gaining strength as he committed fully to his chosen course. He was killed not by enemy forces, but by American operatives under orders to protect powerful men from the consequences of their actions. Frank moved closer to the stage as Blackwood's security team began converging on Harrison's position. Emma remained seated, her eyes fixed on the general as he spoke the truth her father had died to protect. I was part of the command structure that allowed this to happen, Harrison confessed, ignoring the security personnel now mounting the stage steps. I chose institutional loyalty over justice for one of my men. That failure has haunted me for 32 years. Blackwood himself was approaching the podium now, his expression a mask of controlled fury beneath public composure. General, you're unwell. Let us assist you. Harrison ignored him, continuing with renewed urgency as microphones captured every word for the assembled media. Lieutenant Miller's daughter is here today, he announced, gesturing toward Emma in her father's jacket. For 3 decades, she has carried his legacy without knowing the full truth of his sacrifice. Today that ends. Frank intercepted 2 security contractors moving toward Emma's position, his hand flashing credentials with sufficient authority to momentarily halt their advance. Official recognition, he stated firmly. General's orders. The momentary confusion bought precious seconds as Harrison continued, pulling a flash drive from his uniform pocket. This contains Lieutenant Miller's evidence, documentation of American officials supplying chemical weapons technology to Iraq, followed by the deliberate elimination of witnesses to protect political careers. Blackwood reached the podium, physically inserting himself between Harrison and the microphone. The general is experiencing medication side effects, he announced smoothly. We'll take a brief recess. Harrison's voice rose above the interruption, military command presence cutting through attempted containment. The truth cannot be contained by political convenience. Lieutenant James Miller died defending American principles even when American officials abandoned them. His sacrifice deserves recognition. His daughter deserves justice. Frank moved with practiced efficiency through the confusion now spreading across the ceremony space, reaching Emma just as Blackwood's security personnel attempted to establish control. With calm authority, he guided her toward the stage where Harrison stood defiant, despite Blackwood's efforts to remove him. Emma Miller, Frank announced clearly, helping the girl ascend the stage steps. Daughter of Lieutenant James Miller, United States Navy SEAL, killed in action during Operation Mirage. The crowd fell silent, attention focused on the small girl in the oversized military jacket now standing beside a 4-star general. The contrast created a visual narrative more powerful than any prepared statement. Innocence beside authority, both united in pursuit of long-delayed truth. This jacket belonged to her father, Harrison stated. Bashir stayed, hand resting gently on Emma's shoulder. It bears the patch of an elite unit that officially never existed. Lieutenant Miller wore it with honor, died with courage, and left it as his daughter's inheritance, along with evidence that has finally come to light. Blackwood's expression shifted from controlled fury to calculating assessment. recognizing the public relations disaster unfolding before cameras that transmitted live to regional networks. His security team hesitated, unwilling to physically remove a child from the stage during a Veterans Day ceremony. Today, Harrison continued, I am announcing the posthumous award of the Navy Cross to Lieutenant James Miller for extraordinary heroism in combat operations against an armed enemy of the United States on January 17, 1991. The formal language of the citation cut through political maneuvering, establishing military recognition that could not be easily dismissed or contradicted. Blackwood's security personnel exchanged uncertain glances, awaiting direction that their civilian commander seemed suddenly reluctant to provide. Additionally, Harrison added, a full congressional investigation into Operation Mirage will begin next month, examining the evidence Lieutenant Miller sacrificed his life to preserve. Frank maintained his position beside Emma, watching Blackwood's calculations shift from containment to damage control. The public nature of the revelation, the media presence, the Veterans Day context, all combined to make direct intervention politically untenable. Emma, Harrison said, addressing the girl directly, your father was a hero in the truest sense, a man who stood for what was right even when it cost him everything. This medal, he removed a case from his pocket, opening it to reveal the Navy Cross, belongs to you and your mother, along with the nation's enduring gratitude. Emma accepted the medal with the solemn dignity she had inherited from James Miller, her small fingers closing around the case with reverent care. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly across the hushed ceremony space. My father believed some things were worth dying for, she said, words clearly her own rather than rehearsed. The truth was one of them. Thank you for finally telling it. The simplicity of her statement, the clarity of a child cutting through decades of adult obfuscation, resonated through the crowd. Spontaneous applause began, building as veterans in the front rows rose to their feet in tribute not to the general on stage, but to the fallen SEAL represented by his daughter in jacket. Frank observed Blackwood's retreat from the stage, the calculated withdrawal of a professional recognizing a battle lost. The former CIA operative moved toward the ceremony's edge, already speaking into his communication device, damage control, contingency planning, political survival. Catherine joined them on stage, maternal pride visible beneath the emotional weight of decades of struggle finally vindicated. Harrison shook her hand with formal respect, the gesture acknowledging a debt that could never be fully repaid. Mrs. Miller, the general said, loud enough for nearby microphones to capture, on behalf of a grateful nation, please accept this long overdue recognition of your husband's extraordinary service and sacrifice. As ceremonial presentation gave way to procedural conclusion, Frank maintained professional vigilance, monitoring Blackwood's position, tracking security personnel movements, ensuring Catherine and Emma remained protected throughout their moment of public vindication. The ceremony concluded with traditional honors, flag salute, national anthem, benediction offered by a local minister. Throughout, Emma stood with the quiet dignity that had defined her father's service, the oversized jacket no longer appearing too large for her small frame, but perfectly fitted to the legacy she now consciously carried. As attendees dispersed, media representatives converged on the stage, cameras capturing images that would dominate news cycles, reporters seeking statements that would define narratives for days to come. Frank guided Catherine and Emma through the controlled chaos, ensuring their dignity remained intact amid the sudden attention. Harrison rejoined them at the ceremony's edge, his military bearing maintained despite visible fatigue. It's done, he said simply. The investigation is already established, documentation secured with trusted congressional allies. Blackwood and his associates cannot contain this now. Frank nodded, professional satisfaction tempered by awareness that challenges remained. They'll still come after you, he noted. Political operatives survive by discrediting opponents. Let them try, Harrison replied with grim satisfaction. Terminal cancer provides remarkable freedom from future considerations. My remaining time will be spent ensuring this investigation reaches its proper conclusion. Emma tugged gently at Frank's sleeve, drawing his attention. What happens now? She asked, practical concerns replacing ceremonial solemnity. Do we have to keep running? Frank knelt to her eye level, his expression gentle but honest. No more running. Your father's evidence is public now, protected by too many people to be contained. You and your mother can build a life without looking over your shoulders. The simple assurance, security after years of uncertainty, stability after constant disruption, brought tears that Emma had not shed during the ceremony itself. Frank's large hand rested briefly on her shoulder, the gesture conveying protection that would continue beyond this single day. Your father would be proud, he told her quietly, not just of what you did today, but of who you've become, someone who stands for truth even when it's difficult. Emma wiped away tears with the sleeve of her father's jacket, composure returning with characteristic determination. Chimera strong, she said, the unit motto now a personal mantra, a connection to the father whose sacrifice she finally fully understood. Always, Frank agreed, rising to his full height as Jackson joined their group. Tactical assessment complete. Blackwood's team is withdrawing, Jackson reported. Media presence provides temporary protection, but they'll regroup once coverage fades. By then, we'll have everything secured, Frank replied. Congressional investigation established, evidence distributed through multiple channels, witnesses protected by public awareness. Catherine looked toward the dispersing crowd, her expression thoughtful. James always said the best defense was making sure the truth had too many guardians to silence, she recalled. I never understood what he meant until today. As they moved toward the school parking lot where Jackson's Jeep waited, Frank maintained professional vigilance, habit and training overriding intellectual awareness that the immediate threat had passed. 32 years of operational security could not be abandoned in a single morning, regardless of circumstances. Emma walked between them, her father's jacket now a symbol of vindication rather than controversy. The patch that had drawn mockery now attracted respectful nods from veterans recognizing its significance, understanding dawning that their community had harbored an unacknowledged hero for years. Mr. Harrington, Emma said as they reached the vehicle, her voice carrying the serious tone of important business, will you teach me more about what my dad did, about the SEALs and the Chimera unit? Frank exchanged glances with Catherine, seeking maternal approval before answering. At her slight nod, he smiled, the expression softening features hardened by decades of carrying unspoken truths. I'd be honored, he replied. Your father left a legacy beyond that jacket and medal. Skills, values, a way of approaching challenges that deserves preservation. 6 months later, spring sunlight filtered through new curtains in the modest house Catherine and Emma now called home. A property on the outskirts of Riverbend, purchased with the assistance of a Veterans Support Foundation established in James Miller's name. Frank Harrington sat at the kitchen table, coffee mug in hand, reviewing the morning newspaper with its headline, Senate hearings continue. Former CIA officials testify on Operation Mirage. The congressional investigation Harrison had initiated was proceeding with methodical thoroughness, unearthing decades of classified decisions that had prioritized political expediency over accountability. Blackwood himself had fled to a non-extradition country 3 days after the Veterans Day revelation, his absence effectively an admission of guilt that simplified the investigation's progress. More coffee? Catherine asked, the months of security and stability having softened the hard edges of constant vigilance that had once defined her. Thanks, Frank replied, folding the newspaper to conceal the more disturbing details from Emma, who was due home from school any minute. The front door opened with the controlled precision Frank had taught her. Security habits that Emma had absorbed naturally, integrating them into her daily routine without the fearfulness that had once accompanied such measures. Mr. Harrington, she called out, dropping her backpack by the door. I got an A on my history project about Dad. She bounded into the kitchen, energy and excitement replacing the careful, defensive posture of 6 months earlier. The oversized jacket no longer accompanied her to school daily, instead hanging in a place of honor in her bedroom, brought out for special occasions rather than as constant protection. Let's see it, Frank said, genuine pride in his voice as Emma produced a meticulously researched presentation about the Gulf War, SEAL operations, and the specific role of specialized units in gathering intelligence. Ms. Anderson said it was the most thoroughly documented project she'd ever seen from a fifth grader, Emma reported, satisfaction evident in her bearing. I'm not surprised, Frank replied. You've got your father's attention to detail. Catherine watched their interaction with quiet gratitude, the bond between her daughter and her husband's former teammate having evolved into something that filled a crucial gap in Emma's life, not replacing her father, but providing a living connection to his world, his values, his legacy. Harrison called this morning, Catherine said as Emma settled at the table with a snack. The doctors are giving him another 3 months. He wants us to visit next week. Frank nodded, understanding the significance. The general had outlived his initial prognosis by 2 months already, sheer determination keeping him alive to see the investigation through its critical early phases. We should go, he said. He's earned the right to see how his decision has changed things. Emma looked up from her homework. Can we take him the picture from the memorial dedication? Good idea, Catherine agreed. The photograph showed the three of them standing before the newly established James Miller Memorial at the Naval Special Warfare Command, official recognition of a man whose service had been deliberately obscured for 3 decades. The ceremony had been attended by current and former SEALs, many of whom had served with James but had never known the full circumstances of his death. Frank glanced at his watch. Time for his afternoon shift at Oak Ridge Elementary, where he continued to serve as security officer by choice rather than necessity. The position provided normalcy, routine, and the opportunity to observe Emma's development in an environment that had transformed from hostile territory to supportive community. Training session this weekend? He asked Emma as he prepared to leave. She nodded eagerly. Jackson's teaching navigation. He said, I'm better with a compass than most of his adult students. Doesn't surprise me, Frank replied, the pride in his voice unmistakable. The weekend wilderness skills program they had established, ostensibly for all local children, but designed with special attention to Emma's aptitudes, had become the highlight of her month. Jackson, Frank, and several other veterans taught everything from orienteering to first aid, emergency shelter construction, to signaling techniques. Not preparing her for danger, as James had been forced to do, but equipping her with competence and confidence that would serve her regardless of what path she chose. As Frank departed, he paused in the doorway, watching Emma and Catherine through the window. Safe, secure, finally able to build a life without constant vigilance, without the shadow of secrets and surveillance. James Miller's final mission was complete. His daughter knew the truth, carried his legacy, and lived in a world where his sacrifice had ultimately been recognized rather than concealed. Frank Harrington drove toward Oak Ridge Elementary, the weight of 32 years of silence finally lifted from his shoulders. The ghosts of Operation Mirage had been laid to rest, not through forgetting, but through the opposite, through truth acknowledged, justice pursued, sacrifice honored. Some missions continued beyond death itself. Some bonds transcended time and circumstance. Some values remained worth fighting for, no matter the cost. As he arrived at the school where it had all begun 6 months earlier, Frank allowed himself a moment of reflection on the power of a simple military jacket worn by a determined young girl to finally bring truth to light after decades of darkness. The Chimera patch might have faded with time and wear, but what it represented, honor, courage, commitment, had only grown stronger in the hands of those who understood its true meaning. Chimera strong, always.